What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Here we're going to do a post-lottery NBA mock draft. If you didn't know, the lottery just came out, as I'm recording it this week, and it's going to be interesting to see where some of these top prospects go. Let's share my screen right here. Perfect. All right, here we go. So if you see here, we have our whole NBA mock draft set up. I use Fanspo. It's a good website. We got the NBA draft order. We don't have to do my custom order anymore. And yeah, here we go. Okay. So first on the clock, we have the San Antonio Spurs. Obviously, there's one big prospect that stands out this year. We're not going to do anything too crazy. We're not going to overthink it. We're going to give him Victor Wembanyama out of France. Victor is probably the best prospect we've seen in a long, long time. I mean, you don't really need to overthink this one. Earlier this year, the Spurs moved on from Jakob Poeltl, who, had a lot of flashes there. He's with Toronto now. So you have a hole at the center, but even if you didn't, you'd have to take Victor. He's a generational talent. So I think that's an easy selection for San Antonio. Next up, we have Charlotte, who's in a little bit of a more difficult situation. Scoot and Brandon Miller are two guys that are definitely tied to them. They fit roles for different reasons. I'm going to have to pick Scoot Henderson, though. He's just the better player. I know it might be an awkward fit next to LaMelo, but the team needs to move on from Terry Rozier at the two guard anyways. So why not try to get this insane playmaking backcourt? And if we see LaMelo go out with injury like he has in the past couple of years, you have a guy that can step in right away. I think you have to take Scoot for the talent alone, which puts us with Portland, who rose all the way to number 3. And they need scorers outside of Damian Lillard. I mean, who knows if Damian Lillard will be in Portland next year, but whether he is or isn't, you need so much more scoring on this team, scoring that they lost when they moved on from CJ McCollum. So I'm going to take one of the best pure scorers in the draft. It's going to be Brandon Miller. He ended this season very poorly at Alabama last year. I know March Madness didn't go how he or Alabama may have wanted, but throughout the season, we saw a guy with an NBA-ready jumper and someone that can just shoot the ball. I know he has his off-the-court stuff, but as a player, he fits into Portland great. Houston's up at number 4. Miller, Scoot, and Wembanyama were kind of the big 3 prospects in this draft. A lot of people are going to have them going top 3. After that, who really knows? Houston in the past has taken, tall, lanky guards that didn't play college basketball and had a lot of question marks. They played that AAU style ball. I think you know where I'm going. I will give them Amen Thompson. I have my own personal thing with the Thompson twins. They were 20 years old, playing against OTE guys that were mostly 16 through 18. So I don't love the talent level, but from a pure prospect standpoint, Amen Thompson, he's a fun playmaker. He shoots the ball confidently, and he's 6'7", 200. I mean, he has an NBA ready build, especially for a point guard. So I think the Rockets are going to take a chance on him. I'm not a big Josh Christopher guy. I'm not a big Kevin Porter Jr. guy. So if you want Thompson and Green to be your backcourt going into the future, I don't think that's a bad decision. Next up is the Pistons. The Pistons have a lot of different ways they can go. I'm seeing a lot of Jarace Walker buzz here, some Taylor Hendricks stuff, even some Anthony Black stuff. But I'm going to go with Cam Whitmore. Villanova was not a great squad last year. It was one of their worst performances in recent history. This is a team that's usually making March Madness every single year. So although I was disappointed with the team, I think Cam Whitmore really stepped it up, especially towards the end of the year. He looked like that surefire prospect that was supposed to lead Villanova on a run. Even though they didn't make the run, he looked like everything he was supposed to be as a player. And the Pistons can't afford to take another guard. They took Hayes, Cunningham, Jaden Ivey. They've got their guard room hopefully figured it out. So Bogdanovich is going to be on the way out soon. You need a small forward for the future. I think Cam Whitmore could be that guy. I'm higher on him than many people are, but I think he's NBA ready. I think he'll be a good addition to that Pistons team. Next up is the Magic. The Magic are in a really interesting spot. As we know, they were not a very good team this year, but they took Paolo number 1 last year. He's had a great year. So there's a lot of different directions you can go. I worry that their guard room is flooded. They have Fultz that's had, he was pretty good last year. You have Hampton, you have a couple guys back there that are kind of filling up spots. So I think you attack the front court once again. You get a player that's not like Paolo, then you keep Taylor Hendricks in Central Florida. I mean, he doesn't have the offensive game like Paolo, but he has much more on the defensive side. He's 6'9". He can guard 3 through 5 on the defensive side. And he doesn't need the ball in his hands to be successful. I think that's what UCF liked about him so much. I mean, his draft stock was incredible just because he was always making the right play on defense. And, in lob situations or, catch and shoot situations on offense, he's that guy too. So you don't need to get him the ball every play to have him be a stud on your squad. I think that's exactly what the Magic need. Number 7, I think Indiana is going to want a guy that is a little more ball dominant. I mean, we see Tyrese Halliburton, we see Buddy Hield. They have some pieces, but they need another guy that can be explosive with the ball. Perfect guy for that situation is Jarace Walker. One word I'd use to describe him in my scouting is just aggressive. I mean, on defense, he's closing out to everything at full speed. He's going to be the first one to crash the glass on the rebound. So when he gets the ball in the pick and roll game going downhill, he will not slow down for anybody. The Pacers have Jalen Smith. They have Goga Badatsi. They have some guys in the front court, but nobody that plays like Jarace Walker. I think he'd be a super interesting fit on this team, and a pick and roll with Halliburton, who's probably the best playmaking point guard in the league right now. Him and Jarace Walker in a pick and roll in Indiana, that could be something that actually profiles well for the future. So I feel like I have to throw Jarace Walker to them on that spot. Number 8 is the Wizards. The Wizards find themselves around this spot every single year, it feels like. And it feels like in recent years, they've been trying to take safer day one ready picks just to get Bradley Beal and Porzingis at this point some help. I think you got to do something different this year. I think you got to take a guy with the highest ceiling possible, but a pretty basement level low floor. But you need to get talent on this team, whether it takes a couple of years or, he's ready by tomorrow. The guy with the most talent left on this board would probably be Azir Thompson. I mentioned my thing with the Thompson brothers earlier. I don't love the competition, but you need a flyer. I mean, I look at especially a guy like Johnny Davis that they took, who Johnny Davis was supposed to be the safe option, and now he can't even get minutes on the team. He's not even like a realistic piece right now. So you get a guy like Azir Thompson. He's 6'7", 200. He can fly. He is incredible with the ball above the rim. And I think he's a comfortable three-point shooter. So although I'm worried about how the competition level plays into the NBA, I'm not worried about the prospect. I think Washington should take a shot on a guy like him. Number 9 is the Jazz on the board. The Jazz find themselves in this 9th spot, which is better than we may have expected. I mean, we know Lauri Markkanen had such a great year, and the Jazz started hot, but they're still picking in the lottery like usual, it feels like. And they need a true point guard. I mean, I love the Sexton and Clarkson thing they have going on. They move on from a guy like Mike Conley. So you need a guy that can make and play some defense. Kason Wallace is the perfect guy. He's a very traditional point guard. He showed out at Kentucky. I don't think his assist numbers do him justice. Excuse me. I think he's one of the best playmakers in the country. He was last year. And if I'm Utah and I can get him in the top 10, I think he's worth the selection. Not to mention his on-ball defense is incredible. It just adds to the type of player he is. I would be happy to grab him at this spot if I were Utah. Now at 10, we have Dallas. Dallas was probably the most disappointing team in the league last year. You get Luka, obviously one of the best players in the league. You get Kyrie at the trade deadline, and the team's in the lottery, which is not something I may have expected. So I'm going to scroll down the board a little bit here. Some guys like Chiante George, Grady Dick, they're guys that are always going to be mocked here. I'm actually going to roll with Dariq Whitehead. Dariq Whitehead was a 5-star prospect. I want to say the best in this class going into his freshman year. And he did not have the year that he may have wanted at Duke, but he declared for the draft anyways. And although his numbers weren't great and Duke didn't have the season that they may have hoped for, I mean, Dariq Whitehead still has all the tools to be that guy day one. I mean, Dallas needs a guy that can compete day one. I know that's why Grady Dick is another option. We'll bring him up in just a little bit, but Dariq Whitehead could kind of fill into that Dorian Finney-Smith role. He doesn't play defense like Finney-Smith by any means, but where he may lack in defense in that regard, he makes up for in shot creation. I mean, if we're talking about a rookie that can make their own shot, Dariq Whitehead is top 5. And, the Mavericks with Luka and Kyrie, those are guys that can both make. They're guys that work with the ball in their hands. Get another guy that can make his own shot and maybe bail those guys out late in the possession. I think Dariq Whitehead would be a great fit right there. After that, we have Orlando back on the clock. I give him Taylor Hendricks earlier, a guy who, is more of a defensive stud, might show up in those ways. We got to get them a shooter, a guy that can just shoot the ball, and that's Grady Dick. I mean, that's really what his whole role at Kansas was. He was the stretch shooter, and, he put up 14 points per game, which is great in college basketball. So Orlando, as I mentioned, they have Paolo, who's a ball-dominant guy. They have a lot of guards who work well with the ball. If you can get a spacer, you make Paolo's job much easier. As we know, Paolo was horrible from the 3 last year. I'm sure that will develop, but he probably won't ever be one of those top-tier three-point shooting guys. Grady Dick could do it his rookie year. So, I mean, keep it simple. The guy can shoot the three. Orlando needs more spacing. It's an easy pick. We're here at 12, and one of my favorite players in this whole draft is still on the board, and he's falling for no reason, just because of scheme fits and, roles that I don't think he would have fit well into. Talk about a role I think he'll fit great into. I think Anthony Black would fit well on the Thunder. I know. I know the Thunder have Shea, they have Giddey, they have Dort. They keep drafting guards. They even had Trey Mann. These are guys that work well with the ball. They probably don't want another lanky guard, but I'm going to explain why this works. I mean, he is not like Dort. He is not like Giddey, where especially Giddey, where he has the fundamental game without maybe a lot of high flying athleticism all the time. Anthony Black is the reverse. I mean, Anthony Black has his moments where he dribbles a little too much. He might put his head down, but once his head is up, he is flying with athleticism. I mean, we see he has 5 rebounds. He has more rebounds than assists, which I know that doesn't always profile great, but in college ball, that just shows me that he likes to jump for rebounds. He's aggressive. And if you can build him next to Shea in a backcourt for the future, maybe kick Giddey to the 3, that is explosive. He has moments in college where he looks like prime Derrick Rose just based off the bounce alone. I don't think he plays much like him, so maybe a weird comparison. But athleticism-wise, I mean, he hits ceilings almost just as high as anybody. Next up, we have Toronto. I mean, it's not a Toronto draft if they don't take a 6'7" to 6'9" guy with a surefire jumper and some weird developmental tools. And that's just Jet Howard for me. Unlike a guy like Scotty Barnes, maybe, who would fit that role usually, Scotty Barnes is kind of, he's a little choppy. His jumper looks a little weird. He's effective usually, but Jet Howard doesn't have any of those issues. Jet Howard has an NBA-ready jumper. He looked nice at Michigan. And he can be a guy that can go out and get you 20, 30 in the NBA, realistically, which is, great value for pick number 13. I mean, there's a lot of great things to say about him. Not a lot of great things to say about that Michigan team. So I know there's issues that maybe people just thought he was a shot chucker. He wasn't really, helping that Michigan team win, which, I think are realistic criticisms, but college success doesn't matter a whole lot when you're getting drafted in the NBA. I think having a tall shooting guard next to Van Vliet, if you keep Van Vliet around for a while, it's going to help him a lot on the defensive side. Jet Howard has some room to improve there, but you take the intangibles over everything in the draft at certain points. And I think the Raptors are a team that loves to do that. Next up, we have the Pelicans. I mean, Pelicans are in a weird spot. This was a team that definitely should have been the playoffs in my head, but they have a couple different holes. They don't have any super pressing needs, but they have a couple different ways they can go with this. I think Nick Smith Jr. is the play. He reminds me a lot of Dyson Daniels, and as you know, Dyson Daniels is already on the Pelicans, but I trust Nick Smith's jumper a little more, where Dyson Daniels might have him in athleticism and burst and stuff like that. I think Nick Smith has with his offense. I think he's more consistent. And if Daniels is, that guy, he can play your 2 guard in the future. What says Nick Smith can't play that 1 guard? I mean, you really don't know what's going to happen with McCollum and Jose Alvarado. I mean, these are guys that have played well, but how much longer are you going to have them? Depends on who you ask. I think Nick Smith Jr. is an answer more than a question. If things go bad in that backcourt, he can be the answer for the future. But I don't think there's a lot of pressure for him to perform day one. I think it's a good situation for him. And I think the Pelicans would be happy to have him. Next up, we have the Hawks. A couple different ways the Hawks could go with this. I'm going to go based on what I know they like. What I know they like is taller, maybe more filled out, 3s and 4s that can shoot the 3. And that's Bryce Sexton to me. I mean, he kind of came out of nowhere, but look at his frame. You can even see in the picture right there. He's 6'5", 235. He's a strong guy, and he shoots the hell out of the 3. I mean, he reminds me a lot of Sadiq Bey, AJ Griffin, guys that the Hawks like in the past. But I don't think he's, going to steal any minutes. I think he can coexist with a guy, especially like AJ Griffin. And, if the Hawks move on from Sadiq Bey, they don't want to pay that contract. Bryce Sexton can do it all on a rookie deal, in my opinion. I really liked him at Ohio State. I know Big Ten basketball can get kind of weird, especially if you're on a team like Ohio State, who's towards the bottom of the Big Ten basketball. But I just think as a player, he is a good fit, and I'm impressed with how far he's leaped up this board. I would not have mocked him this high, a couple months ago, but he's a really solid prospect. Next up, let's talk about a guy that had a lot of college success, and that would be Jordan Hawkins. I mean, we have the Jazz earlier in this draft, so I think, Kassan Wallace is a great player. You got to get something a little different if you're going for a second pick. I think Jordan Hawkins is electric. He can get into spots where he's one dribble pull up, and he can get into spots where he's catch and shoot. Everything about him is pure scoring. A great mark to look at when you think about how college players are going to translate their jumper into the NBA is their free throw percentage. Jordan Hawkins shot 91% from the line on a UConn team that won the national championship. Personal team, or I would say team success in college doesn't always matter for the type of prospect, but it doesn't hurt to know your guy's clutch. And Jordan Hawkins is that guy. Him and Andre Jackson were electric at UConn this year. Andre Jackson, he's another guy that could go in this first round. Who knows if we'll have him here? There's no telling right now, but he's a fringe guy for me for sure. 17, we have the Lakers. The Lakers always like to take guys that are NBA ready. I mean, their core guys, AD and LeBron, aren't getting any younger. So they got to get a guy that can compete right away. That would be Chris Murray to me. My player comp for Chris Murray out of NBA guys would be Rui Hachimura. And he has found much success for the Lakers just after the trade deadline when the Lakers got him this year. So if you get a guy like Chris Murray there, I mean, I think he does similar things. He's lanky. You can trust him on defense, but more than anything, he's a shooter. I mean, 20 points per game at Iowa is incredible. Excuse me. We saw his brother Keegan as a top 5 pick just last year. And I think Chris does similar things, but where, Keegan might have him beat with offensive consistency, I think Chris can profile more as an athlete. I think this Lakers team loves to take high flyers. I wouldn't call Chris Murray that, but I would call him consistent. And you're picking at 17 right now. You got to find a guy that can contribute right away at 17. That's not always easy. I think Chris Murray, he's a little bit older, but he does that for you. It's worth a selection. After that, let's talk about another guy that's fallen down my board where he should have been picked a lot higher, but you can't always control how the board rolls. I'm going to say Chiante George. One thing the Heat have is a lot of guys that can shoot the three off the catch, off a one dribble situation. Besides Jimmy Butler, I'm not really looking at a lot of guys that can create their own shot. Maybe Gabe Vincent, but I think Chiante George is that guy. He's a different type of player than a lot of the Heat's mold, but I also think, the Heat could be moving in a different direction. Not saying they should. I mean, as I'm recording, they're up 2-0 on my Celtics right now. This is an NBA Finals team, possibly. But I think eventually, just with the big contracts they have and the older guys, you got to look towards the future to take a guy that can create for himself, maybe alongside Jimmy Butler. And that's Chiante George. I mean, he's tough at getting to the rim. He put up 15 points per game at Baylor last year. And he started the year off hot. I got a little worried towards the middle of the season, but he's still that same Chiante George. So I think the Heat would get a steal right there, which makes me a little upset as a Heat hater, but it would be a great pick. Next up, we have the Warriors. They're in a weird position. They don't really know where they're going to be picking next year. You can't really tell if this team's going to be a championship level team next year. You're going to be having a lot of moving pieces. So I think what you should do if you're the Warriors is get a guy that can contribute into the future and a guy that you can let sit on the bench for a couple of years. And I think that's Jalen Hood. I loved Schifino going into college. I think he was an amazing prospect, and he's a playmaker. I mean, once again, don't let the numbers tell you otherwise. If you watch him play, he makes shots for other guys. He had a great connection with Trey Jackson-Davis, who won the Player of the Year last year. And if he can build something like that with these young Warriors forwards, I'm looking at Kuminga, I'm looking at Moody, then that's a special connection that we can build up. There's no pressure for him to play right away. He'd be right under Steph Curry. And, getting mentorship from Steph Curry leads to a point where, hey, maybe if Curry calls it quits early, retires in the next couple of years, Hood Schifino can step right into that role. And if not, he'll get you solid minutes off the bench. I really like Schifino here. I think he just profiles as a Golden State Warrior to me. Another guy that will profile well with the team I give him to, it's going to be Gigi Jackson to the Rockets. I mentioned earlier, they love to take these lanky dudes that, play that AAU style of ball. I gave him Thompson earlier, Amen Thompson. And Gigi Jackson, of course, he went to college. You see him in the South Carolina jersey, but he was committed to North Carolina to, fit into that, Roy Williams, Hubert Davis role with that squad, just be one of those great players. And then he flipped his decision last minute to be the guy at South Carolina. They list him at 6'9". He's probably more like 6'10". And he was the main ball getter at South Carolina. I mean, he would pull up from the outside. He would handle the ball up the court. He chose South Carolina so he could put himself in position to, prove that he can handle the ball. He still has his moments where I don't believe he can do that, but he's developing and he's raw. I mean, talk about a Houston team that likes to jump at raw talent. That's kind of been their identity for the last couple of years. But I mean, at his best, he could be like Jabari Smith Jr., who they invested a top 3 pick in just last year. I mean, he profiles similarly. I think where he lacks parts of his game are, a lot of things that Jabari Smith does well. I think they profile similar in height and weight. But with that being said, Gigi Jackson, I think, has a higher ceiling than a guy like Jabari Smith. I mean, if he can turn into that ball handler that you trust coming up down the floor, I mean, at 6'10", that's ridiculous. I mean, that's stuff we don't talk about with anybody in this class except for maybe Victor. So, I mean, Victor's quite a bit taller than that, but you get what I'm going for. Gigi Jackson was raw. Houston likes to take those guys. Maybe let him sit on the bench, let him develop. He could be a G League guy. I see that very well. But let's talk about Brooklyn here. I mean, Brooklyn's had a weird year. You move on from KD and Kyrie in the same season after just moving on from James Harden, a couple years before. It's a weird spot to be in if you're Brooklyn, but they're finally ready to rebuild again after it seemed like they were ready to contend. So why not get some guys that can accelerate the rebuild? I think Kobe Buffkin is an electric, twitchy guard out of Michigan. They don't even have his picture up here. Ridiculous. But that goes to show how he's risen up draft boards. He was not a first-round guy going into the year, but that Michigan team that was highlighted by Jet Howard had Kobe Buffkin working well off him. I mean, in his fastest moments, he looks like De'Aaron Fox out there. It's ridiculous. But, he's still got to develop a lot with the offensive game. He's not as much of a playmaker as I was like to see him as. They let him run the 2 guard a little bit because of that. But he's an NBA point guard. He's got to work on the, the playmaking, setting up shot for others. But just as an athlete and as I mentioned, a twitchy player, he's electric. He would be fun on that Brooklyn team. And why not get them another like streaky sort of guy with Maxwell Lewis? He's another guy that rose up the draft boards ridiculously, but he reminds me a ton of like Trey Murphy, the good parts of Derrick Jones Jr. He can just jump with the rest of them. And his defensive length helps him out a lot. I don't think he's always super invested on defense. I think that's something that he'll work on the NBA, but his length on the perimeter makes him hard to even get by. And once he gets the ball in the air, he's bringing it down with some electric stuff. So I think it would be super fun to see him work with guys like Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges in Brooklyn, maybe develop his defensive game a little bit more. After that, it's Portland on the clock. Gave him Brandon Miller earlier. You need a big man. I don't think Nurkic is getting any better. He's had a couple rough seasons. Go after Derek Lively. He's a guy that wasn't great at Duke this year, but he profiles insane. He was supposed to be the guy at Duke. Kind of was slow to start the year, but at the end of the year, even in a tournament loss to Tennessee, Rovals, he was invested on defense. He was just a shot blocker. And, if you can get a guy at 23 who is an elite shot blocker, look at a guy like Nick Claxton that the Nets got around this spot. They got him at 30, I believe, a couple of years ago. And he's developed into being one of the better players on that team. If you could do that similar thing with Derek Lively here, I don't think Portland would be unhappy. After that, let's talk about a guy that, honestly, I still need to do some more scouting on. We're still a little early. It's Ryan Rupert. He brings an inside-outside game to this young Kings team, and he can work well without the ball in his hands. He has great footwork, agility, so he's not a guy that you're going to need to start right away. But if you develop him into being a more confident shooter or, even more electric driving to the lane, I think he's a specialty guy that the Kings could use. I mean, they love their guys from overseas. Shout out to Domantas Sabonis. So I think you get a guy like Rupert. You can let him sit in the G League a little bit. Maybe you can give him some minutes off the bench. But I think he's an interesting player. I want to learn more about him. So, as we get into later mock drafts, I'll have more to say. But it would be a disservice not to put him in the first round after the success he had in France this year. After that, I feel a little uneducated because I'm going to go for another guy that I don't know that much about, but I'm just going to go based on what I've heard and, the short volume of stuff I've scouted. That's Bilal Coulibaly. I'm going to get his name right, too, I promise. But he's been insane up the draft boards. He was a guy that wasn't even on my radar until a couple of weeks ago. And now I think he's a guaranteed first-round guy. He played with Victor in France. He is absolutely electric. The things they say about Victor's athleticism, I see that in Coulibaly, like in smaller volumes. There's a clip I watch that, amazes me every time. Victor misses a little jump hook, and Coulibaly is standing under the rim, and he jumps so high, a flat foot, that he tomahawks it. And I honestly didn't think it was real at first. It was absolutely ridiculous. But he's a raw guy. He's still got to put the offensive tools together. I think just based on his athleticism alone, he'll be a solid defender in the NBA, but he's got some pieces to put together. If you can develop him and the whole John Morant saga still works, those two would be an electric duo when it comes to athleticism. After that, let's talk about a guy I do know really well that I've been a fan of. Almost declared for the draft last year. He decided to stick with the G League. That's Leonard Miller. I mean, for the G League Ignite, he was awesome. Where Scoot Henderson was kind of that raw guy that, made plays. Leonard Miller was the guy on the receiving end of a lot of those plays. He could hit from everywhere. I love his mid-range game. He's 6'10", so he can finish around the hoop. And that three ball is developing. I wouldn't say that it's great right now, but I really think that three ball has been something I've been seeing get better every single year. Leonard Miller is one of my guys in this draft. Realistically, he can play all the way from the shooting guard to a small ball center, but he's still raw. A lot of these guys down the board, it's that they're not bad players. They could be picked a lot earlier, but we haven't seen their development fully yet. I think Leonard Miller in Indiana would be awesome. I really think he's going to succeed in the NBA. But he's got to be in a place where it's patient, give some time. I mentioned Scoot Henderson's teammate just then that, he's on the Hornets in my mock, and let's get him, another guy that kind of reminds me of Leonard Miller a little bit, and that's Noah Clowney. Noah Clowney, he's not fully developed on the offensive side, but he's 6'10", 205, super young guy. And worst comes to worst, he's a lob threat for Scoot Henderson. I mean, he jumps out the gym. He has, good mobility for his size, but he has so much room to develop as a shooter. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. He could, worst comes to worst, transition to like a center, do some Robert Williams stuff where you're not asked to shoot threes. But if he develops that three ball, he is a steal of a pick. It's worth the chance at 27. After that, let's talk about a guy that is, I don't want to say fully developed, but he's up there. It's Jalen Wilson. The Jazz are back on the board. They've taken some flyers with these last couple picks. I won't go too crazy on Jalen Wilson. He was really good. You can see his stats here on a Kansas team. But he's 21, which, in the NBA, that's old for a draft pick. And he's 6'7" as a power forward. If he gets drafted, he's probably going to move to a small forward just because of his height. But his offensive game is elite. I think he has good traits as a defender. It's just, are we going to see it translate well to the NBA? I'll get a guy like Luka Garza, who so far the answer has been no, but I think it's worth the selection anyways. I think he has a lot of good traits on him. After that, we're at 29, only 2 picks left. Indiana's back on the board. I just talked about how much I liked Miller. I gave him Walker earlier. Let's get a guard. Don't want to load up on forward too heavy. This guy, Trevion Smith from North Carolina State, he's a stud. I really liked him. And if you want an NBA player comp, he reminds me a ton of Bones Highland. He is skinny, 165 at 6'4" is kind of ridiculous, but he's going to force himself open and he's not scared to shoot. His point making, it could use some work, but I think if he's in Indiana, Halliburton's got that mostly covered. He is just going to come off the bench and get buckets. I mean, and that's all you really could use for him at 29. So he has a ceiling. He could develop into a starter level player. But where I imagine him, succeeding is in like a Jordan Clarkson role, a Bones Highland role, and, a Jordan Poole role. I know he's been bad, but, we know what Jordan Poole can do at his prime. And if that's what Trevion Smith can pull off, it's a great pick at 29. Can't be mad at that. Then we get to the last pick in the first round. There's a lot of guys I wanted to put here. Colby Jones will probably be a first-round pick in real life. Seti Sissoko. I mean, once we get closer to the draft, I'll have another mock-up, and these guys will be better reflected on. But let's talk about a guy that was incredible in the tournament. And let's hope I didn't miss him. Oh, man. I got to kind of work on the fly here. They changed the rankings recently. See the small forwards. He is. Wow, they bumped him down kind of far here. I don't know if you guys know who I'm looking for. Shout out to Ben Shepherd, too. I heard he's had a really good combine. I have Julian Strother here. I must be higher on him than the scouts are, so maybe he won't be a first-round pick in real life. But let me tell you why I think he should be, I guess. He was a menace at Gonzaga last season. He's a clutch shooter. Obviously, a lot of people will remember that shot against the UCLA Bruins. But his game is so much more than that. He has great court vision for his size. Again, 1 assist a game, it doesn't really matter. in college, stats can get kind of jumbled up sometimes. But when I watch the tape, great court vision, and his jumper is smooth. It doesn't matter if he can score in college. If his jumper was broken, that is not the case. His jumper is probably one of the best in this entire draft class. And he was a stud on that Gonzaga team where I think he was the best player. I mean, say what you will about Drew Timme, but Julian Strother was that guy. He was confident. He was always ready to shoot. And I really think he can develop well as an NBA player, especially on a Clippers team that needs a guy right now today. They don't need these guys that are going to show up in 5 years. It just doesn't fit their timeline. They need a guy that can go out and hoop right after they draft him. And I mean, looking at the board, I think Julian Strother's that guy. Obviously, he's fallen a little bit, so maybe this could be an early second round guy if they want to trade up for him. But based on the fit, based on the type of player, and based on the fundamentals that I know he has, he's a first round talent to me. I think the Clippers would be happy to take him. So I guess it's going to wrap up the draft right there. I mean, I'll scroll through it for you guys while I talk. It's a lot of interesting stuff that I have in this mock. But also, I mean, I think we're starting to get a pretty solid top three. I think we know it's going to be Wembanyama, Scoot, and Miller. But, Thompson, Whitmore, and even Jarace Walker are fighting for spots up there. So, I mean, who knows? With that being said, I think that's going to wrap it up for this mock draft. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments, who's your team and who do you want them to pick? Or who are some guys I'm sleeping on? I mean, I mentioned a couple in the honorable mentions, but, I look at a guy like City Sissoko or, Andre Jackson, if those are first round picks to you, I don't blame you. But let me know in the comments. Did your team get the player you wanted? Who's your rising star in this draft class? I mentioned a lot about Julian Strother, but who's a guy that you think is going to succeed? And that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much. Check out the YouTube, check out the Instagram, and hit us in the comments down below. Thank you.